in female sports.
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that.
AFN talked with Steve McConkey, Director of Sports Action, a branch of Four Winds USA.
California is a big track and field state, especially for high school. What happened in the last few weeks is you got a trans athlete that's competing as a triple jumper in high school, and he's blowing the girls out of competition. His triple jump is 8 feet longer and very good distances. So I think there's a lot of people in California right now talking about coming against transgender athletes.
McConkey said what's really strange is that last year in Oregon, there was a male competing against women and another in Washington State. They both won the 400-meter competitions at the state championships.
And these are very big Democrat strongholds. They were actually booed in the stands, which is very, very kind of weird because usually in those states, that doesn't happen. So I think Governor Newsom is starting to realize that it's a non-winnable issue.
McConkey said he believes Governor Newsom will run for president.
And he's trying to moderate. But still, I'm not sure what he's going to do there. But at the same time, this is really good news in the sense that people are starting to get it. And a Democrat like him, a liberal, is starting to say, hey, maybe we need to wake up.
I'm Bronson Woodruff.
And finally, President Trump reportedly weighing imposing a dairy tariff on Canada.
It seems that dairy farmers are glad President Trump is sticking up for them, but they have concerns that a prolonged trade war with Canada will be bad for both sides. Currently, under the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement, a limited amount of American dairy products can be shipped into Canada tariff-free, but once that amount is exceeded, steep tariffs kick in. Milk gets hit with a 241% tariff once Canada imports 50,000 metric tons in a year. Cheese, a 245.5% tariff once 6,250 metric tons are imported. And butter at 298.5% once 4,500 metric tons are imported.
For American Family News, I'm Muskie Pugh.
The American Family Association's mission is to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of our culture. We also support the church. Our goal is to be a leading organization in biblical worldview training for cultural transformation. We believe true morality flows from biblical principles and directs people to the manner in which God intends them to live.
Thank you for standing with the American Family Association as we seek to stop the erosion of godly values. We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. Glad to be with you today on the program. It's our live edition of the show. Walker Wildmon here with you, myself and Rick Green. We're your host each week here on American Family Radio during this 1 o'clock Central Hour. And we'll be with you the next 55 minutes or so. And we'll have a couple of guests on this segment as well in the second and the third, as all, assuming all things work out as planned. Let's turn our attention to the scripture for the week. We are out of the book of Psalm. And, Bobby, it's been 140-something weeks.
That's a big book.
Based on the number of books, right? Book a week. So we're out of the book of Psalm, and we can say we went through, not necessarily verse by verse, but we did go through the book of Psalm, at least a verse from each chapter. And we're in Proverbs now. And so we'll see how long we stay in Proverbs, maybe a little longer than 31 weeks, based on how many verses we use a week per chapter. But nonetheless, Proverbs, look at me. Proverbs 1, verse 7, very well-known proverb. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fool despises wisdom and instruction. So fearing the Lord is a good thing. Fearing the Lord is a good thing. That's Proverbs 1, verse 7. The Culture Warrior film, we pushed it last week, and it did very well. So I want to thank everyone who went to culturewarrior.movie and watched the film. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We doubled, basically, our view count last week compared to where we were at the beginning of the week. And nearly 20,000 folks went and watched the film, culturewarrior.movies. So we appreciate all of you going to culturewarrior.movie, watching the film, keying in your information, sharing it on social media, etc. So thank you to everyone who participated last week in our push. And just a reminder, I've got the DVD here in hand because you can order it. The DVD and the Culture Warrior kit you can get at culturewarrior.movie. But it's an excellent film. It not only tells the story of American Family Association, my grandfather Don Wildmon, but it gives a lot of context to the cultural battles that we face today. It gives a lot of context and a lot of history behind them. So it's just a very, very beneficial film to watch for anyone. culturewarrior.movie, go there and check it out. Order the Culture Warrior kit too. Comes with a DVD, a book, a couple other items as well. culturewarrior.movie. It's free. You just got to key in your name and email, and you can watch the full film there, over 90 minutes long, there at culturewarrior.movie. Well, the Activate Summit, we've been pushing this as well, but the Activate Summit is starting to fill up, and it's this summer, June 12th through the 14th. We're going to have a rock-solid lineup of speakers, and I'm not even on the list, so I'm not talking about myself. We're going to have Todd Herman there. We're going to have Frank Turek. We're going to have Dr. Alex McFarland. We're going to have Abraham Hamilton III, Ed Vitagliano. I will be participating in a panel, I believe, so I will be in attendance. And it's going to be a great time of fellowship, a great time of uplifting and challenging. Our theme for the first ever Activate Summit is Biblical Bedrock, building on the authority of Scripture. That's our theme for Unit 1 of our Activate curriculum. And this is what's neat about how this is going to work is the Activate Summit is a play off of our Activate curriculum. And so each year we're going to basically have, the theme is going to be one of the units. And I think we have at least 5 units, maybe more than that. But each year we're going to take a theme of the unit that we have in the curriculum, and we're going to cover it and let that be our theme at the conference. So it's a pretty neat how this has worked out. And if you want to get the curriculum, of course, you can do that now at activate.afa.net. You can participate and purchase the Activate curriculum right now at activate.afa.net. But if you want to come to the summit, come to the conference this summer, we'd love to have you, June 12th through 14th. Pricing is very affordable, $75 for ages 13 and up, $50 for ages 6 to 12, and free for children. Free for children 5 and under, that is. So very family friendly. We are American Family Association. We want people to bring their kids, their grandkids, and let's have a good time of fellowship at Activate Summit. Activate.afa.net, right there on the homepage of that website. You can register, activate.afa.net. We hope to see you there. Lastly is listener testimonies. Man, Share-a-thon is just about a month away. That's crazy to think about. Our twice annual Share-a-thon is coming up in April, and we want to hear from you. We love playing these listener testimonies throughout the week of Share-a-thon. And so if you want to call and tell us about how AFR has impacted your life, keep it brief, relatively speaking, maybe a minute or two, but you can call 877-876-8893, 877-876-8893, and I'll try to mention this several times this week. But we would love for you to call in and share about a 1 or 2 minute testimony about how God has used American Family Radio to impact your life. 877-876-8893. All right, let's hit some news items before we end this segment. The economy is what a lot of people are talking about, specifically the stock market. Here's kind of where we are. So, as I've said, and I'm going to say it again, President Trump inherited an absolute dumpster fire of an economy. He inherited a dumpster fire of a lot of things, foreign policy, foreign wars. But the economy, it has just been a disaster. And what has been propping up the economy has been government spending. That's a fact. You can't dispute that. You look at the data, you look at the employment numbers, you look at the GDP numbers. The government spending has been propping up the economy. It's a drug, okay? It's a drug. Well, here we are. President Trump's one of his top items he's working on is reducing government spending. And he's doing that through a variety of ways, but that's an overarching goal of President Trump. He campaigned on it, reducing government spending and bolstering the private sector. All right, so spending is down. Now, how much we're going to have to see, but spending is down. A lot of these agencies are spending less money than they were. President Trump is going through slashing employment numbers at these agencies. We just saw that in the jobs numbers this past week. Upwards of 60,000 plus federal employees have either retired early or been terminated or let go in the past 4 to 5 weeks. And once again, Elon Musk and Doge, along with the cabinet secretaries, they're reducing spending through a variety of these agencies. So what's the effect here? All right. All of a sudden, there's this murmuring about recession. I personally don't think we're going to get a recession. I just don't. I don't think the spending has dropped that much. I don't think government spending has dropped that much, that drastically to induce a recession. But regardless, let's just remember what I covered a couple weeks ago, and that is that we can't eliminate the government spending deficit without inducing a recession in the short term. All right. Now, I covered this thread on X. If Bobby will remind me, I'll find it and we'll link to it again. But there's a pretty extensive thread on X from this entity called the Kabosi letter. I'm probably completely mispronouncing that, but it's basically an economic newsletter, and some of their content's free. You don't have to pay for it. And they were talking about what it would look like if you eliminated the government deficit. And what I'm talking about by deficit in just layman terms, it's the amount of money the government has to borrow because it doesn't have enough income to pay its bills. All right. So Washington, D.C., the politicians, the government, they pass these spending bills, and they know when they pass them, they don't have the money. They don't have the tax revenue to pay for the spending, so they have to go to the Treasury and they have to print money. All right. That's called deficit spending. It's like pulling out the credit card. But our economy has become so hooked on this deficit spending, it's literally like a drug to the economy, if you want to use an analogy. And if you were to drastically eliminate the deficit spending, meaning you basically balance the budget and you only spend what you bring in, that would in fact induce a recession. It would nearly 100% induce a recession because you're drawing down on the spending at such a drastic rate that you would probably get a recession. That's interesting to know, and it's kind of frightening to think about how reliant we are on this deficit spending as far as propping up the economy. So I don't think we're going to get a recession. I could be wrong. I'm not an economist, so do not in any way listen to my advice to make financial decisions. I'm just telling you, looking at where we are today, I would just be surprised, and once again, I could be proven wrong. That hasn't happened much on the show. I would be surprised if we get a recession because it just wouldn't make sense, all right? And I get, you reduce government spending. Theoretically, you're less money is going into the economy, et cetera, et cetera. But the amount of stimulation, the amount of private sector stimulation that President Trump is inducing here, whether it's deregulation, whether it's the upcoming tax cuts renewal, all these different things, whether it's fairer trade, I would just be very surprised if the economy goes into a recession. Now, you could see GDP slow a little bit. A lot of these companies, they're jittery about the tariffs. They don't like this whole tariff talk because it brings uncertainty to some of their imports that they're bringing in and selling on the U.S. market. But if I had to put a bow on this, the long-term effect of President Trump's policies are going to be very, very good. All right. the long-term effect of President Trump's economic policies is going to be very, very good. That's my opinion. Okay, that's my opinion. Now, in the short term, getting to there could be a little rough, right? But getting over this kind of hump of the first maybe 6 to 12 months, I think it's going to be a very good 4 years, economically speaking. Let's listen to the Treasury Secretary, Bessent, on this move away from government spending into the private sector spending when it comes to investment, clip 3.
Assumption, and that is an unstable equilibrium. The bottom 50% of working Americans have gotten killed. We are trying to address that. We're trying to get rates down, and could we be seeing that this economy that we inherited starting to roll a bit? Sure. And look, there's going to be a natural adjustment as we move away from public spending to private spending. The market and the economy have just become hooked. We've become addicted to this government spending, and there's going to be a detox period.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. A detox period. And let me just remind you folks, we have to stay out of the mainstream legacy media Democrat Party monopoly system that they have going on in the media. We have to get out of that and just think for ourselves here, okay? Government spending that props up GDP, that props up jobs numbers, is not true growth. GDP means growth domestic product. At what pace is the American economy growing? And government spending through deficit spending it's fake, okay? It's rigging the numbers. Quite literally, rigging the numbers, all right? So we can't look at GDP under Biden at 3, 4, whatever, and say that things were hunky-dory, things were great. We want Biden again. No, my friends, you do not want Biden again. They were fudging the numbers because they were spending money like drunken sailors. It was all fake. We need real private sector growth.
I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. President Trump's Department of Justice is dropping a lawsuit filed by the Biden DOJ that tried to force Idaho to allow unborn babies to be murdered. Idaho passed its Defense of Life Act to protect moms and their unborn children, preventing doctors from terminating pregnancies unless medically necessary to save the mom's life or in cases of rape or incest. In August 2022, the Biden-Harrises sued Idaho to overturn their law and to force hospitals to murder babies in elective abortions. The Trump administration, however, has now notified the necessary parties that it is dropping that ridiculous lawsuit. Praise God.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner, or visit the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
Spring Share-a-thon is coming April 8th through the 10th, and we want to hear from you.
And it sparked something in me, and it started my ministry.
If you have a story about what American Family Radio has meant to you, call us at 877-876-8893.
My wife and I are expecting our first child, and I'm going to keep on listening and just being encouraged.
American Family Radio is a wonderful resource.
Listener stories encourage our staff and other AFR listeners.
I am seldom around like-minded believers, and being able to listen to AFR all day, 7 days a week, is truly a blessing.
Call 877-876-8893 and leave a 1 or 2 minute voicemail. Then be listening, because you may hear yourself during Share-a-thon, April 8th through the 10th. That number again is 877-876-8893. 877-876-8893. And thank you for listening to American Family Radio.
And my father, your great-grandfather, fought in World War II.
Really?
He was a gunner on the big ship out in the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
Your great-grandmother did her part, too.
Was she on a ship?
Oh, no. She stayed back home. She and a lot of her friends worked really hard in a factory. because the men had gone off to war. And they held scrap metal drives to help in the war effort. The folks back home were heroes too.
Here at the American Family Association, we consider you the heroes back home. As you fulfill your responsibility of caring for your family day to day, your partnership with us is crucial as we fight the enemies of freedom in America. Thank you for your commitment to the American Family Association.
Grandpa, what's a scrap metal drive?
Let's get some cookies, and I'll tell you all about it.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to The Core here on American Family Radio. Well, the disclaimer once again, as we wrapped up last segment, is I'm not an economist and I'm not here to offer financial advice. I'm just telling you my opinion about how I see the economy working. And I think the Trump administration, I think the first 4 years gave us a glimpse into what these 4 years are going to be like. Overall, I think the Trump economy is going to do very well. But it's going to take some time. This stuff isn't fixed overnight. Speaking of being fixed overnight, one of the largest, not the largest, but one of the largest budget items in the federal government is Medicaid. Yes, Medicaid. Hundreds of billions of dollars, over near $700 billion in Medicaid is budgeted with the federal government, and then states pick up the tab to a degree on some of that spending. But I want to introduce Idaho State Representative Jordan Redmond from District 3 in Idaho. He's on with us now to talk about Medicaid and other things. Representative Redmond, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we wanted to have you on first to talk about the topic of Medicaid because, the fear mongering out there. Anyone who talks about Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security, as far as reforms needed in those programs, the Democrats and the media they go into fear mode and they try to act like we're going to cut grandma's check. Basically, is the narrative. And that anyone who wants to touch in any way Medicaid or Social Security, that you're taking money away from grandma who's been paying into the system her whole life. That's kind of the narrative. All right. But let's get into the reality of it and not the narrative that the left wants to spin, and talk about Medicaid reform, because if we want to reduce deficit spending in Washington, D.C., we have to be able to touch these entitlement programs because there's a lot of problems built in the entitlement programs. So, Representative, break it down for us.
Yeah, you bet. So when I first got into the legislature, which was just 3 years ago, it's my second term, one of the first meetings I had was a joint Senate and House Health and Welfare meeting dealing with Medicaid expansion. So Medicaid expansion was a ballot initiative that passed our state in 2018. And essentially what that was increasing the Medicaid population for able-bodied, working poor. My dad served prior to me being here, and he actually had some reforms to try to avoid getting to the expansion, and unfortunately wasn't able to get him over the finish line. So our state moved towards expansion. So when I got here, learning more about this year, that budget, when it first passed by a ballot initiative, we had actuaries kind of give us an idea on what that's going to cost. This year, FY 2026, the actuaries said it was going to be about $510 million. The governor's budget request for Medicaid expansion this year was $1.36 billion, $850 million for our state over what was anticipated. And there's been no reforms done at all with the program. So I ran a bill, got it through our committee, got it over the House floor. It's currently sitting in the Senate. But essentially what it would do is it add reforms specifically to that Medicaid expansion population. Some of those reforms, and again, we're not talking about we're not talking about the elderly. We're not talking about people with disabilities. We're not talking about children, pregnant moms, any of that. We're talking about able-bodied adults on this expansion program. And so some of those reforms were having a work requirement, right? And all we said was you need to be working 20 hours a week. you need to be studying or doing some sort of vocational school 20 hours a week, or you need to be volunteering. We left it very broad for that reason. Like if you want to volunteer with a nonprofit, that's fine. That had a lot of pushback. We put a cap on the expansion population, that it couldn't be more than the amount of folks with disabilities or children. We put improper payment controls. So that's another part with the Medicaid that's a huge issue. So on that $1.36 billion, we have an 18.6% of improper payment, meaning those payments are sent out improperly, maybe fraudulently, maybe a eligibility deal. But I mean, somehow, that much, $250 million is being sent out improperly. We wanted to verify eligibility twice, right? Life circumstances change, whether you made a little more money, you lost money, whatever that is. We wanted to verify that. We wanted to get rid of presumptive eligibility. So right now, myself, say I go into a hospital and I say I'm eligible for Medicaid, they'll automatically enroll me in the Medicaid program. And even if I'm not eligible for it, those claims will get paid. So we tried to put some sideboards on it. A lot of the pushback was if we couldn't hit the criteria that we outlined in this bill, then that would repeal Medicaid expansion. And that was a lot of the pushback. So when I got over to the Senate, I met with their leadership and kind of went through some of the things that we heard back. And so it became clear it was going to be difficult to get a hearing or get it through the Senate. So we came back with a different bill that pulled out some of those, but also added some other good legislation in. We got it over the Health and Welfare Committee in the House, got it through the floor, and so now I'm presenting it in the Senate today. So regardless, there needs to be reforms in Medicaid. There has to be, because it's not sustainable. If you look at the growth of it, we grew by 11% last year on a $5.2 billion budget, which for our state is astronomical. And dealing with the entitlement programs, it's also, we balance our budget in the state of Idaho, but an entitlement program, if it goes above that, we have to pay the entitlement programs out.
Yeah.
So we're on the hook for it.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Once again, we're talking to Idaho State Representative Jordan Redmond about the topic of Medicaid. Let me ask you this, Representative. Let's talk about it's probably not the type of reform I may be suggesting here is probably not politically even feasible, and there may not be a better alternative. But let's just go back kind of to the beginning. Is Medicaid even a good idea? Or is there something better, a better way to do this? I'm just thinking we got to be careful not getting just stuck in this mentality of this is how we've always done it, so we must keep doing it. I mean, was this even a good idea to begin with? It just seems very convoluted, big, a lot of money going around through the government here.
Well, I think like a lot of well-intentioned ideas, in the beginning, it probably was a good idea, right? A safety net program for kids, pregnant women, single moms, you know what I mean? People that are disabled. In the beginning, yeah, it's probably a good idea. Unfortunately, the growth we've seen in that program is like none other. I mean, it's just grown so big, and it's completely unsustainable without some serious reforms to correct it.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to get too sidetracked in the weeds here, but some of these programs have actually have basically marriage bans, and they wouldn't call them that, but you don't qualify for assistance if you're married. But if you're divorced or out of wedlock, well, yeah, you qualify. Isn't that the case in some instances with Medicaid?
100%, because it's based on your family income, right? And so there's many perverse incentives within Medicaid, whether it's I can't get I've had literal employers tell me, they've had employees come to them and say, hey, I know you gave me a $2 raise. I don't want it because I'll lose my Medicaid benefits. Yep. Or I want to get married to this person, but then our income changes because we're married, and so I can't get married. So there's a lot of very perverse incentives. And I think kind of probably a lot of the intention of what it's grown to be is a single-payer system, right? And because of the control that they have within that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know a couple that was intentionally not getting married because they were the wife was gonna lose. Well, it wasn't the wife; it was the partner. The lady was gonna lose Medicare benefits. But they were functionally married, right? And according to common law, they probably were married, but they wouldn't get officially recognized by the government with their marriage because they didn't want to lose the benefits. Now, That's not justifiable under any circumstance, but I'm just telling you the practical reality that people are talking through when it comes to the economics of Medicaid. It just doesn't make sense in many regards. But I want to also touch on these working age men, these able-bodied working age men that in some ways are getting Medicaid, but they're not working. They're sitting on the couch. That's a problem too, correct?
Oh, 100%. I mean, again, 47% of our Medicaid expansion population is not working, right? And we, there's dignity in work. There's value in work. If I give you $1 or you earned $1, you look at those $2 very differently, and it builds the person more than anything else. I mean, then they become a part of their community rather than sitting at home scrolling through Twitter or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
That's not healthy for the individual. And that's another perverse incentive that hurts the person.
Let me ask you this. What is the appetite of reform? Because we know the Democrats, maybe at the state level it might be different, but we know in Washington the Democrats are like, anytime you want to cut or reform anything, they're like, no, we can't do that. Like they're all about adding new programs, new money, more deficit, and they don't ever want to be the adults in the room that say, hey, we need to look at this, take another look at this. What is, in Idaho at the state level, what is the appetite for reform? Like, is this where you've got kind of bipartisan momentum behind, or are you facing some resistance? What's the status on the ground there?
Yeah, so the first bill, the House Bill 138, had a lot of resistance. We got it off the floor 38 to 32. So there was resistance there. However, our body's made up of 61 Republicans, 9 Democrats. So the follow-up bill, 348, we got through party line, but the Democrats will not vote for any kind of reform within an entitlement program.
So you've got that many Republicans in Idaho, and you can't get more votes on the House side? Was that the House side, the 38, 31 or whatever?
38, 32 on 138. You know, I will say 345 was party line. I mean, it was 61-9.
Okay.
But and, you know, in these committees, too, you have a good bill like that. But, you know, there's probably 200 people that sign up against and 4 that sign up for, you know, even on something like as easy as like adding work requirements, again, that I think actually helps the person more than anyone else in the program. It helps that individual.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. The fact of the matter is you and I we could go back and forth and kind of debate the intricacies of Medicaid. But the reality on the ground is it's insolvent long term. Yeah, the way you're describing this is it doesn't matter what you and I think about this or whether we should cut this or reform that. The reality is especially states, if you don't, you're talking about effective, what Elon Musk calls de facto bankruptcy. I mean, the states are going to have to do this, correct?
In our case, you're exactly right, because in our case, because it's an entitlement program, we have to pay those bills. What do we pull away from because we balance our budget? So now does public education suffer? Does public safety suffer? Does transportation? Whatever that looks like, we have to pull from somewhere. So in order to pay for, you know, again, in this case, working bodied adults healthcare, now we're going to pull away from kids, or now we're going to pull away from public safety. You're exactly right. At some point, and that's why you have to be here to make tough decisions, because if we don't, we're going to lead our state into, bankruptcy.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately that people throw a lot of emotions around with this, and they do a lot of guilt tripping and victim talk, and it's not very helpful at all.
It's a good point that you made earlier with, some of the, the media and kind of spinning this thing up. So I actually had, I showed up to my office up in Coeur d'Alene for a town hall, and I showed up to grab my mail, and there was 3 police officers out there that there was a legitimate, credible threat against my life for running a reform bill, because the media is saying we're getting rid of Medicaid, Rep. Redmond's getting rid of Medicaid. So I had a guy at my office live streaming that he was going to blow up the office, he was going to kill me. I mean, all these different things. Now this guy's arrested, the FBI is involved, and unfortunately, for him, because he listened to this, leftist narrative, now he's sitting in jail. And you're exactly right. They spin up this stuff, and they gin the groups up to where they think there's this evil thing. No. If we do these reforms, we can keep Medicaid, but it will be sustainable.
Yeah, that's probably one of the most unfortunate parts of this debate, is that it's not adult-like in many regards. It's very emotional, very kind of propaganda-driven, and and the facts don't matter, right? It's all about the headlines. And the tragedy of it all is, in the long run, people suffer. The state racks on more debt. People suffer. There's no accountability. And it's not, honestly, not very compassionate. To your point, the most compassionate thing you can do is incentivize work and have accountability with the taxpayer dollar. So I appreciate your work on this. Hey, Representative, before we let you go, mention the legislation on getting Bibles back into the classrooms.
You bet. Yeah. So have another bill in education, just dealing with having the Bible be read in classrooms at the beginning of the day. This is, following the history and tradition test, been longstanding in our state. Obviously, in 62, they pulled that out. And so now that we have invalidated the Lemon test, we're bringing back history and tradition, and we're saying that, no, you need to do this. There's no instruction required with it, but it's, we're going to speak about the Bible. We're going to read the most historically accurate book of all time. We also make, if somebody has a conscious objection, we have to make accommodations for that. But this is part of our state's founding. This is part of our country's founding. So I personally don't see any issue with it, but getting it to the finish line could be difficult.
Yeah. Well, I agree it's important. It is part of our country's history. And just because something is religious doesn't mean it's illegal or can't be talked about in public schools. And the Bible's one of the most, if not, well, I would argue it's the most central textbook to the founding of America, because everything about our country, how it was formed, even the Constitution, is built upon biblical precepts. Without the faith of the founding fathers, this country would look like a whole different country, maybe not even exist. Representative, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. That's Idaho State Rep Jordan Redmond from District 3 in Idaho, and he's working on Medicaid reform to make it solvent. That's a compassionate thing to do to ensure Medicaid exists down the road. It's the most compassionate thing you can do, is to reform Medicaid so that it's here in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, etc. So that's Representative Jordan Redmond, and we appreciate him coming on the program. Folks, these are tough issues. They actually make you have to think. But some of this stuff's got to be done for the future of our children and grandchildren. It has to be done. We'll be back in a few.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildmon and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
A phenomenon of new media is the proliferation of streaming. There are many, many streaming channels, and believe it or not all of them are providing wholesome content. For that, you can visit stream.afa.net. There you'll find Christian-based lessons and sermons, as well as original movies from American Family Studios. You'll also find video versions of some of your favorite AFR programs. Media has changed, but there's still good stuff available. Find it at stream.afa.net.
Let's see, if something costs less, a lot less, but people are actually happier with it, that sounds like something to look into, and that's MetaShare. Maybe you've heard joining MetaShare can save you or your family up to $500 a month, and that's huge, but it's also true. People are just happier with it. They love being part of something that reflects and promotes their values and what they believe in. MetaShare works, too. It's been around for 30 years now, and members have shared more than $7 billion of each other's bills. People love having telehealth and a huge nationwide PPO network, so yeah, really, you can save a ton and like it better. Imagine being happy with how you're taking care of your health care, whether you're self-employed or part of the gig economy, or you just want a plan that you're happy with. Here you go. You can call right now and get a price within 2 minutes, a very, very smart use of 2 minutes. Here's the number you need. It's 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE, 833-44-BIBLE.
for your walk with Jesus. I'm David Wolin with Haven Today, inviting you to anchor your day in God's Word.
The name of Fanny Crosby is familiar to many. She's the writer of the hymn, "Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine." Fanny became blind at 5 years old, and on this day in 1835, she arrived at a school for the blind, already a gifted poet with a bright future. Fanny's favorite Bible verse came from 1 John 3, which says, "We know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." You can imagine how that comforted her. Fanny knew that one day she would be able to see again, and her first sight would be the face of her Savior. And that promise applies to you and me and all who are in Christ, and that is our great hope. Grow in your daily walk with Christ through Anchor Devotional. Visit getanchor.com.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to the program here on American Family Radio. Well, our next guest will dovetail well from following our discussion in the last segment, how we wrapped up the interview talking about getting the Bible back in our public schools. Julie Pickren's with us now. She's on the State Board of Education in the state of Texas, District 7. That is. Julie's with us now. Hey, Julie, welcome to the program.
Howdy, how you doing?
Hey, doing well, Julie, and we appreciate your service on the Texas State Board of Education. Before we jump into these topics of education, tell us kind of how the education board is set up in Texas. I mean, are you elected by different districts, or does the governor appoint you? Tell us a little bit about how that works.
We're set up a little differently than a lot of states. Our State Board of Education members are each elected by a district. The district that I represent actually is about 10,000 square miles of the great state of Texas. I have about 2.5 million constituents, and I serve almost 6 million children every day of my life. But our education commissioner is appointed by the governor. So kind of a little different model than some states. So our board members are elected and our commissioner is appointed.
Well, tell us kind of the lay of the land in Texas from an education standpoint. You've been on this. You've been on the State Board of Education. You've been elected since 2023. But tell us how is Texas trending, and what are some of the areas that you've been working on specifically?
I have. I've been elected at the state level since 2023, but I was also a school board trustee member for a lot of years before that. In the fastest growing school district in the state of Texas. So I've been elected in education in our state for almost 11 years now. We have seen education in my, probably I've worked also on education policy 2 to 3 years before that. So I've been in education now at a local and state level for about 15 years. And just the things that we have seen at the state level, coming from a trustee and being elected, like I said, the state, is the academic rigor. There's several things that are very concerning. Number one is the academic rigor has significantly dropped. What we are considering advanced placement now, whenever I was elected in 2014 and 15, whenever I was elected then, that it used to be what we would consider like general education. The academic rigor has substantially dropped in instructional materials. The other thing that we were seeing that we were having a huge problem with was critical race theory in our instructional materials. And so on lots of indoctrination, lots of social construction coming into our classrooms, kind of leaving the basics behind, leaving education behind, and really kind of a shift and a hyper focus on indoctrination during the school day. So in Texas, we have passed a lot of laws around concerning things around indoctrination in Texas. And now we have our new Texas instructional materials called the Blue Bonnet materials that encompass and honor and follow all of our laws, U.S. Constitution and state constitution.
Let me ask you this, Julie. Once again, we're talking to Julie Pickren. She's a State Board of Education member in District 7, serving District 7, that is, in the state of Texas. When it comes to you've got federal education policy, state education policy, and then local. Maybe get into in your case, there's districts. But what's the balance here? Obviously, we can talk shortly a little bit about the federal role, but definitely state and local is kind of the tradition as far as government's role in education. How much say should maybe the state have versus local? Because I'm all about local is better, but help me kind of think through, is there such thing as like too local? Do you start getting, not good standards and lack of accountability? Help me kind of walk through how much the state should be involved in education versus just straight up local districts.
Okay, so let's kind of start at a federal level first. Let's work our way from the top down, if you don't mind. So the federal government, prior to the Obama administration, everything came to states as block grants, no strings attached. It was like, okay, here's your money for your state. Your state needs to figure out how to spend it, how to use it. Then we saw with the Obama administration, strings started being attached to block grants. And then under the Biden administration, it went on hyperdrive. I mean, the amount of pages with the ESSER funding, with the COVID relief funding, with block grants. I mean, it just went on hyperdrive, a federal mandate. And, for like Texas, it varies from budgetary cycle to budgetary cycle, but generally federal funding is only about 6% to 8% of how much we spend in education in the state. So the state is funding 94 to 92% of all public education in the state of Texas. And by the way, we spent about $92 billion in the last year on public education. So it's 52% of our state's budget. So anyway, so that was kind of the major shift under the Biden administration, was all these new mandates that came with the funding, which again was a very small percentage, only maybe 6 to 8%, okay, of funding. Then you come to the state level versus local level. So when we look at education on a state, it's a little bit different now in our economic situation in Texas, and I think across America also. The Texas economy is booming. I mean, our state right now this year, just in our budgetary cycle, I think we have over a $25 billion surplus. And so Texas, our economy is booming. So what we're seeing right now in the state is a lot of what I call white collar migration. Normally you have, there's economic classes that families move for a job, right? They might in some economic classes. But what we're seeing right now in Texas is we're seeing a lot of families that are in white collar, college educated positions that are moving quite a bit for different job positions. And so what you need at the state level is you need consistency between school districts, because you might have a family that takes a job in Dallas and then 2 or 3 years later, they're taking a job in Houston, and then maybe they're going to move into tech. And so they're going to be in Austin. So it's a very real thing right now in our state that during a child's 13 years in education, they could be in 2, 3 or more school districts. And so what we need right now is we need consistency throughout the state. Another problem that we've had at the local level is school board elections matter, right? Who you elect matters. And so we have seen some school boards elected, trustees elected in the state of Texas that just really don't care one iota about what our state laws say about pornography in schools, obscenities in schools, critical race theory in schools. So you do need some state level oversight to make sure that state laws are being enforced and that there is consistency with academic rigor and compliance with state laws across the district, across the state.
All right, so let's go. That's a very, very comprehensive answer, though, so thank you. Let's go back to the federal, because President Trump, there's been talk about shuttering the Department of Education at the federal level. Now, it hasn't materialized yet. The White House has actually said basically not right now. That's not on the president's agenda. But theoretically speaking, what are your thoughts on the Department of Education at the federal level no longer existing?
Well, your listeners may or may not know the Department of Education was created out of a campaign promise from President Jimmy Carter to the AFL-CIO, which was the largest union in America at the time. And so, I don't think the Department of Education was created out of really wanting to make education great again, like we're seeing right now, right? It was filled out of a campaign promise to union workers. And so you have to look at what did America look like before there was a Department of Education? You know, what was education prior to 1980 or 1979 when it was officially set up? And so you have to really look at the data and track, has education gone up or has education gone down since there was a U.S. Department of Education? And when I look at data, I just don't see the benefit, honestly, of having the federal government in this space. Because when you talk about children with disabilities, when you talk about educating right idea, Children's with Disabilities Act, Health and Human Services helps people with disabilities very well. That's what they do, right? Health and Human Services. So can Health and Human Services address the needs of a disabled child like they address the needs of disabled adults in our education space? Absolutely, they can. You know, when we look at food and nutrition, that's another big space where the federal government picks up a lot of funding for breakfast and lunch for our school districts. Can Department of Agriculture handle food and nutrition? Absolutely. You know, we've heard a lot about students, about school lunches, that the kids aren't eating them. Okay, what would happen if you took that money for free and reduced lunches and you actually gave that to farmers and ranchers in your local community or in your state to provide fresh, nutritious food for your kids at school? What would happen if the food was actually cooked fresh at the school every day? So yes, I think that there is a beautiful education system that can happen outside of the U.S. Department of Education.
Yeah, and the budget, by the way, for the federal Department of Education is about $270 billion. Now, some of that probably, well, the vast majority of that probably makes its way down to the states. But you would reduce, let's just say, billions, possibly tens of billions in overhead if you simply went back to the block grant system. So what you're saying, once again, we're talking to Julie Pickering. She's a representative at the Texas State Board of Education serving District 7. What you're saying, Julie, is that before Obama, it was simply a block grant system. There wasn't bureaucrats, picking and choosing who gets money and who doesn't. It was just a block grant system before Obama.
Sure. Like I said, we saw it going that way on steroids under Biden, right? Because now all of a sudden your COVID relief fund, you had attached to COVID relief funding mandated what's called underrepresented populations on everything, right? In your GT programs, in your parent advisory committees, just across the board. Well, in that underrepresented population, I'm going to get a little bit technical here because people need to understand the root of what's happening with education at their local level, okay? In that they have merged the LGBTQ issues or LGBTQ with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this is what the Biden administration tried to do to the Department of Education, and in their mandates for education is now everything that had to do with Title IX, boys and girls sports, men, boys and girls locker rooms and restrooms, the LGBTQ training in elementary schools so that children could pick what gender they wanted to be. All of this was tied to that COVID funding because the Biden administration now said LGBTQ is considered a minority population. They're equal to all the other minorities, which if I were a minority that really worked hard for civil rights, right, to get equal rights and civil rights, I think I would be very offended by a lifestyle that someone is choosing is equal to the skin color that God created me. So yeah. This was huge. And that is why so many people are saying, I don't understand. I've elected people with family values and traditional values to my local school board, but yet my school district is still going down this path. Well, it was because it was tied to the money. It was tied to the funding. Yeah, this is when you talk about consistency versus non-consistency, Washington, D.C. is one of the most non-consistent things that exist because you get administration changes and you get Obama and you get Trump and you get Biden and you get Trump and each administration has drastic visions for what they want to do with the Department of Education. So the more consistent approach is state level policy and local level policy and get Washington, D.C. out of it. So I fully support what President Trump's doing to shutter the Department of Education.
block grant the money to the states, let them handle it, take the politics and the ideology out of it. Representative Julie Pickerins, thanks so much for coming on the program. Appreciate your work.
Yes, sir. Thank you. God bless y'all and God bless Texas.
Thank you so much. That's Julie Pickerins. She's on the State Board of Education there in Texas, serving District 7, multiple million constituents there, 6 million children, she said, in her district, in the various school districts there in Texas. So the Department of Education talk makes me excited. Now, the shuttering thereof. Now, the Department of Education was congressionally authorized, not constitutionally, congressionally authorized. And so technically speaking, in order to make it exist no more, you would have to have Congress get involved. But nonetheless, President Trump can basically turn it into a shell of what it is now and probably leave just enough staff to handle the block grants. And that's it. Maybe not even that. That may be able to be handled by somebody else, another agency. But I can guarantee you one thing. Our founding fathers did not envision for education policy in any regard to originate from our nation's capital. Just wasn't a thing. Up until Jimmy Carter, before that, education policy is handled at the state and the local level. And I'll tell you one thing, that ensures local control over education policy. It's a win-win for everybody. Every state in the union, red, blue, conservative, liberal, local control works best for everybody. We'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Abraham Hamilton III.
If you really want to see the tides turning in our country, can I challenge you and encourage you? If the Lord could grab a hold of us in our family, you would see the tide in our politics turn.
The Hamilton Quarter, weekday afternoons at 5 Central on American Family Radio.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.